Coming up next on the Cultural Connections podcast, keeping our communities safe. We'll be joined by John Carmichael, Chief of the Newton Police Department for Newton, Massachusetts. This episode is being recorded live on Thursday, August 19th, 2021. This is the Cultural Connections podcast.
Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Ives, and I am the producer and host of the Cultural Connections podcast. Before I introduce our guest today, I want to remind all of our viewers at home that we are recording this episode live on Thursday, August 19th, 2021. This episode is currently being live streamed on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Therefore, if during the broadcast at any time you have a question from home that you would like answered, from our guest, you may comment below on the platform you're watching. Please also be aware that because I can only monitor one platform at a time, we'll be monitoring the Facebook feed first for about 10 to 15 minutes into the show, then another 10 to 15 minutes of Twitter, and then another 10 to 15 minutes on YouTube for the last of the part of the broadcast. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about today's show. Today's podcast is going to be a discussion about keeping our community safe. Joining me on the podcast is John Carmichael, who is the new Chief of Police for the Newton Police Department, Newton, Massachusetts, where we broadcast from. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you again. So my first question to you is a simple start-off question. Let's start off with you telling our viewers a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, right out of high school, I went into the military. I went into the Army where I was for a few years. And then when I got out of the military, I was hired as a dispatcher with the Medfield Police Department. And I worked there for a few years before they hired me as a police officer. Went to the police academy, worked there for a few more years. And ultimately, I transferred to the Walpole Police Department, where I worked for the last 25 years. Working my way up to being the chief of police there. And I was chief there for about 6 years. I got to the point where I felt like I accomplished all of the things that I had hoped to accomplish while I was there. And then the position for the Newton police chief came up, and I thought that was a very good fit for me. So I applied for the position, went through a long process, and here I am.
Great. Well, that leads me to my next question. Why Newton? What interested you in Newton to come here and come for this job?
I think so. One of my things that I've enjoyed through most of my career was the community engagement side of policing. I always liked to do the investigations and the street police work type of things, but the community engagement part always is what I get the most desire out of and the most, I think, reward from. So when I became a deputy chief in Walpole and then ultimately the chief, that's where I put a lot of my focus. So put a lot of my focus on the community engagement side, community policing, problem-oriented policing, which is putting a focus on going to the root causes of issues and trying to make sure that we do something to prevent things from reoccurring and that type of thing. So that was all really in my wheelhouse. So when I saw the application or the process for Newton, a lot of the things that Newton was looking for were a lot of the things I've always enjoyed doing. 21st century policing and which we've really been practicing here in Massachusetts for the past 5 or 6 years. Community policing, that engagement side of things. That's what attracted me to it. And I said, you know what, I had got to the point in my career where I thought it was a good time for me to try new challenges. And I felt that the Newton position would be some good challenges. And that's what got me here. And so far it's been going really well.
Great. That's great to hear. Now, for the majority of the podcast today, we're going to be talking about, again, the idea of keeping our communities safe. And I know recently here in Newton, a great way for you to start off your tenure as chief here, there's been a recent spike in home break-ins in Newton with I think it was around 5 or 6 recent break-ins around the month of July. Can you give us basically a little bit of an update on where things are today with this issue of home break-ins in Newton?
Sure. Well, so this year we've had upwards close to 50 house breaks in the city of Newton. That's actually up a little bit from the previous year. I'm sorry, previous 2 years, because last year with COVID, a lot of people were home, so we didn't experience as many breaks last year. If you compare us going back to 2019, we're a little bit ahead of where we were at this point in 2019. So our department, one of the things that I found in the last 8-9 weeks that I've been here is on the investigative side of things, we have officers and detective bureau that relentlessly follow up on the crime. They're very good at processing scenes. They're very good on the investigative side of things. And out of the series of breaks that we've had over the last months, several arrests have been made. In the particular breaks that we're talking about now, we developed some information early on with a suspect involved, thanks to video surveillance and that type of thing. And so we were able to have or not identify, but have a suspect in mind. We started to kind of push that through our law enforcement channels in hopes that we're going to be able to identify somebody. A lot of investigation. It actually remains fluid still. We did think that we had some breaks in this case over the past few weeks. However, that still hasn't panned out yet. So we continue to focus on those breaks. The one thing that has happened since then is that we didn't get the information out as quickly as we probably should have. But when we did get the information out, it spread enough to the point where the breaks have so far stopped. And so there hasn't been any new real activity since, those announcements have been made.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very good to hear. Then I guess my next question to you here is then, what is the Newton Police Department doing to ensure that our community is safe and to prevent further break-ins from happening?
That's a great question. So the prevention side is always very important, right? So a lot of that is the community engagement side. Once we got that information out through the law enforcement channels, we started to create bulletins. We did some outreach in the community. So basically what we do is we'll go out, we'll canvass the area where the breaks happen. We will do what we call knock and talks. We'll go to the neighbors' houses, see if they've had any activity, seeing if they've seen suspicious persons. And we start to give some crime prevention techniques and information to them that can help them avoid being victimized by such crimes as a house break. We reached out to our Asian community specifically because a lot of the house breaks, that especially the last 5 that we had, there was a trend in commonalities with the house breaks, but also where the victims were Asian families. So that was very concerning, obviously causing some fear of crime in the community, especially with the Asian community. And so we did some outreach with the community. We did, unfortunately, because of, we're still in that Zoom world, we had a nice Zoom meeting with primarily the Asian community I think we had close to 300 participants, and we had some robust discussion on what we've been seeing, what you can do as far as prevention techniques. And we've done, we got through that meeting, and we're also planning on doing a follow-up meeting with them, which will be more of a focus on crime prevention techniques. And we're going to be using our crime prevention officers to do that. So that'll be the next step in that process.
Okay, great. And that sort of, I guess, in a way ties into my next question, which was going to be about the fact is that, as you mentioned, that 5 of those break-ins that was one of the commonalities, that they were Asian homes that were families that had their homes broken into. Is there anything specific that the Newton Police Department is doing to ensure the safety of our Asian community in the city?
Yeah, so one of the other things we do is directed patrols. And unfortunately with directed patrol, what directed patrol is that when we have a hot spot, we have an area or a type of series of crimes that are being committed, such as house breaks. We focus a lot of our resources there. So we do, like I mentioned, the knock and talks, the canvassing of the area, but we also assign those areas as directed patrols. So officers are out, and I don't want to say we flood the area, but we put a lot of resources in those areas. Some of the things that you won't see are our undercover operations or detective operations, where they're also out and they're trying to identify any crimes or suspects, that sort of thing. That's kind of been an ongoing thing that's been happening. The other thing is that you don't move away from those things, but other situations happen in the city, right? So we've also had other types of things happen, like car breaks and that kind of thing. So you have to put as much of your resources as you can towards a certain problem, while you also have to concentrate on some of the other things that continue to happen in the city. So that takes a good balance.
Absolutely. No, 100%. Now, in addition to those home break-ins, I do know that there was also reports of 2 other targeted Asian hate incidents that happened in the city recently. One in Newton Center with a piece of art, and the other, I forget exactly where in the city, but with an Asian family who had a sign in their front of your yard that said "Stop Asian Hate" that was tossed. Is there anything in addition as well that's being done about these hate incidents that we're seeing specifically as well?
Yeah, so those incidents are also investigated. And one of the great things about the Newton Police Department is that, as I mentioned earlier, we have a very good detective bureau on the investigation side, but we also have a very good community resources, a community outreach bureau as well. And within our community outreach bureau, we have officers that are assigned specifically to investigate any type of hate crimes or bias crimes, or even bias-based incidents that might not, reach the criteria of being a hate crime. So the officers over there do a tremendous job following up on those types of things. And you're right, we did have those 2 incidents. That it is alarming that people will, go to that length to cause damage to somebody's property, or even go on somebody's property and violate their space that way. So we do take it very seriously. Our officers investigate. In these cases, we tried to do canvassing of the area again. We tried to process what we had there. We also looking for any types of cameras or anything in the area that might help us identify who those people are that might have been involved. And then we make notifications. So we make notifications within the city where we have a group of people that are on this bias. I don't want to say bias crimes again, but bias incidents, who all get notified of anytime something like this happens. And then we also notify the Anti-Defamation League. And if it turns out that it's a bias-based crime, we notify the AG's office as well as the district attorney's office here in Middlesex County.
Absolutely. And before we go further, I want to remind our viewers at home that are watching that we are currently live on Cultural Connections podcast, this with Chief John Carmichael of the Newton Police Department. We are discussing ways to keep our community safe, and we are live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And if you have questions from home, please feel free to comment below on your questions. We're going to switch over now to our Twitter feed. We were monitoring the Facebook feed, and now we're going to move over to the Twitter feed at this time. My next question to you is moving away from these break-ins, and yeah, I understand that this incident I'm about to talk about did occur before your tenure as the chief of Newton Police. This was an incident that happened on January 5th with a report of a mentally ill man with a knife in a store in Newton Highlands. Can you remind our viewers, because it was a long time ago, of what happened on that day? And if you're also able to update us on this investigation. And as I said, I understand that this did happen before your tenure as the chief of Newton Police.
Yeah. So, I mean, unfortunately, this is an ongoing investigation. And what happens when in Massachusetts, when there is any type of a death involved, whether it be a sudden death, an unattended death, that type of thing, by statute, the district attorney's office has jurisdiction over that. And so I've obviously, as the chief here, I've gone through reports and 911 tapes and all of the investigation that has taken place up to this point. But I'm not really, I'm not allowed to comment on that because technically the investigation is being conducted by District Attorney Marion Ryan's office. So, and, right now what's going to happen is the District Attorney's office, and she has mentioned this, that they're going to go the route of an inquest, which will be a process that goes in front of a judge. And ultimately, that judge will have findings, and the district attorney's office may or may not accept those findings. And then the district attorney's office will notify us when the complete investigation is done. And as you know, as a police department, we look forward to that. We look forward to that happening. But right now, we're still not in a position where we can comment on it because it is still an active investigation.
Absolutely, of course. No, I understand that. Another big topic, and not just obviously Newton, but I think you can say nationwide, is about police reform, which has been a hot topic across the country, really in recent months, even years for that matter. Can you give us, as a chief, what your thoughts are on this whole topic on police reform?
Well, so ironically, over the last, at least as long as I've been a police chief, and even before that, policing in Massachusetts has been asking for police reform. Believe it or not, the post standards, police officer standards and training, the commission that was created as a result of the Justice, Equality, and Accountability in Law Enforcement, the GEAL Act, which was just passed this past January. Law enforcement has been asking for those types of standards for years. And so now we're at a point where it is in place. And so one of the things that I think that a lot of times goes unnoticed with this is that a lot of places across the country, they have a different level of training, a different level of education for their officers, and a different level, I think, of progressiveness as far as policing is concerned. So here in Massachusetts, 21st century policing, which was a kind of a strategy and a philosophy that was under President Obama, started in 2015. Departments such as Newton and our area in general have been practicing those tenets. And a lot of that means, so building trust and police legitimacy was one of the big ones. As we know, that's what we need to get back to, right? We need to develop those partnerships, develop trust within the community. Some of the other ones are policy and oversight. So that's a big thing with these standards, is developing appropriate policies and oversight of those policies. Technology is big, community policing and crime reduction. Some of the stuff we've been talking here just about the breaks, community engagement, training and the education is very important. And one of the biggest components that we don't talk about, and I don't think enough, is officer wellness and officer safety, because this job, as I've been doing this for a long time, over 30 years now, and the cumulative effect of policing does cause a lot of stress in police officers. So it's very important that we pay attention to their wellness, throughout their career, so that they're supported in some of the things that they have to deal with. So it's here. Certainly police reform, post standards are here, and that's it. These things are you're gonna start to see some new initiatives and things that'll come out over the next months.
That's great to hear. My next question to you, again, as we move along on the topic in the sort of realm of police reform, is an incident that a nationwide incident that I think many that sparked a lot of this discussion and sparked a big discussion, which was specifically the incident that occurred in Minneapolis on May 25th, 2020, where George Floyd, a 46-year-old Black man, died during his arrest. This incident sparked a nationwide discussions on racial profiling with police officers' use of force. Can you give us, our viewers, your thoughts on this issue and what the appropriate action is?
Sure. So that's an example of a situation where police officers were not well trained. There were not good policies in place to address situations like that. And the entire situation is tragic, and it was atrocious as to how those officers handled that situation. And I'll be honest with you, as a police chief, many times, like when you see situations that happen in other parts of the country and you're not really privy to all of the facts and the circumstances of it, we don't typically speak out about it because there's a lot of things we may or may not know. With that particular case, I know I was in Walpole then, but I was very vocal about it. I saw what happened, and I think I was probably one of the first police chiefs in Massachusetts to come out publicly about it and denounce what they did, and denounce how that situation was handled. And I can tell you that the vast majority, if not all, police officers or people in law enforcement support that idea that that was an atrocious, awful act that took place, and it really it hurt all of us, you know. Even though those were the actions of a few officers, that had an impact on all of us, and that case it's going to go down as being a game changer for all of policing to kind of take a step back and look at what's going on. And really, those are the things that are going to come in place with post standards and how we use of force and a duty to intervene when an officer believes that excessive force is being used. So, it was one of the things when I was in Walpole, there was a kind of a, not too long after it, there was a support the police type of thing, and that took place at the police station. But and I appreciate that, but it was also a time for me to use that as a time to recognize some of the things in policing that we need to fix. And so we're going to work towards doing that here in Newton, but also across Massachusetts.
Absolutely, that's great to hear. Now switching back on to our specifically Newton focus, let's talk about specifically the fact, as a new chief for the Newton Police Department, what are your goals and objectives in improving the Newton Police Department?
That's great. Oh my gosh, a lot. So first coming here, right? We have the Newton Police Reform Task Force, who was a group of people that came together following the George Floyd incident, that came up with a bunch of robust recommendations for the police department. We have already started to implement some of the recommendations from that task force report. Mayor Fuller has been so helpful and supportive of me as I transitioned into this position, as well as members of the department. In Mayor Fuller's budget outcomes, she addressed a lot of the issues that had come out of the task force report, put those recommendations into her budget outcomes. So we have a good area to focus on and a good direction to start following. Because, with community policing, one of the first tenets of community policing is allowing the community input and setting the agenda. So what we do, and that's part of that message should come from the community, and that's happened. So we have a good compass to follow now, and those are going to be, that's what we're going to try and do to the best of our ability. And we have a tremendous group of police officers, civilian staff here in the department, and I'm actually excited about taking some of these things and improving the department in every way I can. Community engagement is going to be a big thing. We've already started some programs there. we need to make sure our officers are well trained, they're well equipped. So we're working on any deficiencies we have there. And, I think we'll just in the past 8 or 9 weeks, we started to head in the right direction. We're going to continue to.
That's great. No, that's great to hear. Before we go further, I want to remind our viewers at home that are watching that we are recording that this is the Cultural Connections podcast. We are recording this episode live on Thursday, August 19th, 2021. We're talking about keeping our community safe and what needs to be done in order to do that. And we're joined today by Chief John Carmichael of the Newton Police Department, Newton, Massachusetts. As you just talked about, I mean, with the community piece to this, and I had read that a few weeks ago, the Newton Police Department had launched a community policing initiative used to reward children for good behavior when noticed by a police officer. Can you tell us a little bit more about that new initiative that I think just recently started?
Sure. So that particular community engagement program is called Positive Tickets and Catching Kids Doing Right. And what that is, it's kind of designed to be an icebreaker. So when, it's pretty easy to drive around the city or walk around the city and come across kids that are doing good things, positive things, right? Like using the crosswalk, or wearing their bike helmet, walking their dog for the family dog, just random acts of kindness that might be observed by a police officer during their tour of duty. So it's, you're out there, and what we have to do is partner with, the other good thing about it is we're partnering with businesses in the community. And the first one was Cabot's Ice Cream. Joe from Cabot's Ice Cream was jumped right forward with us, and he wanted to get involved with the program. And so we worked with him, and we came up with the tickets, and we've been issuing those out to officers, including myself. I get out there and do them myself. And if we catch a kid doing something good in the community, we'll stop them and we'll write them a positive ticket that they can use to redeem at Cabot's right now. And there's going to be other partnerships in the community that are going to come forward as well. So so far it's doing really well. I think it's going to continue to kind of snowball and be a good program. Yeah.
That's great. That's great to hear. Again, you sort of mentioned this into the previous, not this previous question, but the question before that about goals and objectives. But I'd like to elaborate. You have to elaborate a little bit further. If let's say you're still with as Newton's chief of police, hopefully 10 years from now, where do you expect to see the police department 10 years from now?
Better off than when I got it. That's the number one thing. You always want to, your legacy has to be that you've made improvements. There's, as I talk to our younger officers, our dispatchers, our civilian personnel here in the department, they all want to get on board. They're very excited, I think, to move the department into the 21st century policing. I think they're very interested in progressing the department forward and making positive change. Some of that's culture change. It's things that, as you assess it, there's things that we can do better, we can get better at. We should always be trying to strive to get better at everything we do. And I think that once I have buy-in from everybody and we're working on it, I think we have that now pretty much, but we'll be able to together move the department into the future and make a lot of positive improvements with it. And I'm very confident that we're going to be able to do that. Just coming in here, I'm very amazed at a lot of the people here, great people, and their capabilities and their dedication and investment in the community is just outstanding. So I look forward to that, and it's going to be exciting. It's going to be an exciting thing to do. One of the other things too is, I don't know if we're applying to get a community resource dog to also help with our community engagement. So that's going to be a good program too.
That's great. That's great. Well, the whole focus on this podcast has been really to be talking about how we can keep our community safe. And we talked at the beginning about how what the police department is doing to keep our community safe. what would be your biggest recommendations to residents on their safety? How do they keep them safe from in these types of burglaries that we've seen, or these hate incidents that we've seen? What is your biggest recommendation?
So cohesiveness is very big, right? The strongest communities are always the communities that come together to solve problems. I think we all recognize that the police are never going to be able to deal with all of the problems we have to deal with alone. So that's why the community policing side, community engagement, creating strong partnerships, being able to create trust between the police and the community is very important. So we need to establish a culture where people feel like they have a voice and they're part of the process in reporting any type of criminal activity or suspicious activity, or even with some of the social issues we deal with, getting rid of the stigma so that people feel safe and they feel comfortable involving the police or our clinician or the services that we have to offer, like the people that are suffering from substance use disorder, or that might be a mental health issue, something where traditionally, I think people, there's stigma there, and families sometimes are reluctant, or they don't immediately get the resources that are available to them quick enough. And so that's where we can really make a difference. Police and the community having strong partnerships, good communication back and forth, and that alone is probably the best crime prevention strategy that we can use.
I know that, and that's great. I mean, I think it's very, very important to everything that you just said. In our final few minutes here, I would ask you more, along the lines of safety. I mean, as our topic is on this, I know from my own household that we have a Ring doorbell. What is the best way for residents, would you say, or people like us in general, to say, to protect their own homes from these break-ins that we've seen? What is your best recommendation?
Very good questions. So there's a lot you can do. So specifically when we're talking about safeguarding your home, right? There's, like you just said, the Ring cameras. Those are a very good tool to have that people can purchase, and they're not very expensive either. A lot of homes that I have found in Newton have some type of camera system that they have. We do have here at the department a sign-up system, and I don't want to scare people away with saying we have a sign-up system, because the sign-up system is just used, not that the police are watching cameras, but that if there is a crime or something takes place in a neighborhood, we have a registry of people that we could reach out to and see if they have cameras that might help in an investigation. And that has come in handy several times already, where we've had criminal activity take place, and because people had some type of cameras in place, we were able to identify a suspect. And so that's happened several times just since I've been here. But there's a lot of things you can do, as well as just a risk awareness, risk reduction techniques, like making sure you lock your doors, making sure you lock windows, making sure that you notify neighbors if you're going to be leaving and going away. You can notify the police department. We actually have a going away form in case anything happens. We can get a hold of people. There's like surveillance systems, alarm systems. There's a lot of communication is very big. So in a neighborhood, notifying your neighbors is a good thing, especially if you're going away, on vacation or something like that. You can let people know. And so that's part of what I was mentioning earlier with the community engagement awareness that we're going to be doing. That's kind of like what we're going to be focusing on, just some of the ways to safeguard the home. As I drive around, and actually after some of the breaks happened, I went up to one of the neighborhoods. I did a walk and talk. I talked to some of the residents, and we actually pointed out some of the things, like very high bushes and shrubbery that block windows, high fences that go up and around the backyard, which are great for privacy, but it's very difficult if someone were to, jump that fence in order to commit a crime or something like that. So little things like that, cutting down on the shrubbery so you can see, the house where there's not a lot of areas to hide or conceal themselves, can be very important. That can be effective. Usually when criminals are trying to target a certain area or a certain home, they're going to look for the targets that are less likely to be detected, right? So those are just some of the things that I can think of right now.
Absolutely. No, those are great tips. And it's hard to think that we are already down at the end of the podcast. These things fly by.
That went quick, yeah.
I know. I want to thank Chief Carmichael again for joining us today on the Cultural Connections podcast. If you have ideas for future episodes of the podcast, feel free to reach out to me directly. You can email me at brianives@gmail.com. That's BRIANIV as in Victor, ES@gmail.com. And I am open to all suggestions for the Cultural Connections podcast. If you had a question that you'd like answered that you did not get a chance to answer today, get to ask on the live podcast, and you have the ability to watch either on our Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or if you're even watching after the live on Instagram, comment below your questions and we'll make sure we get them answered for you at a future time. That said, again, I want to thank Chief Carmichael for joining us today, and we'll see you again next time on the Cultural Connections podcast. I'm Brian Ives, and I'm the producer and the host of the Cultural Connections podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you again for watching this episode of the Cultural Connections podcast. For more information on today's episode, be sure to check out our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also watch this episode again in its entirety on our YouTube channel. This podcast is also available on listening platforms Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Breaker, Radio Public, and New TV. Thanks again for watching this episode of the Cultural Connections podcast.